Welcome to the debate. Our source material today, well, it takes us on quite a journey through the history of human organization. From the very first circle around the fire, right up to this digital threshold we're standing on now. It examines this perpetual experiment humanity's been running on, how to live together.
And the central question that really jumps out from this history, it seems to be this. Is it the technology, the printing press, the steam engine, now data? Is that the primary force driving these big shifts in how we organize society? Or is it the underlying choices we make about structure, things like centralization versus egalitarianism? Are those the real determinants?
Exactly. And my position, essentially, is that technology acts as the necessary catalyst. It provides the essential infrastructure, the scale, that allows or even forces systemic change.
And I come at it from, well, a slightly different angle. While I agree tools enable new things, I believe the material strongly suggests that it's the structural choices, this enduring conflict, really, between the centralized, top-down pyramid and the more cooperative, flatter circle, that dictate how we end up using new technologies. And history seems to show this persistent pattern, repeating old mistakes like excessive centralization and extraction, no matter if we're working with bronze or bytes.
Okay, I follow your logic there, but I do wonder if that perspective maybe misses how technology fundamentally changes the geometry of the problem itself. Technology doesn't just enable existing choices. Sometimes it creates the initial structure we have to deal with. I mean, think about our very first system, arguably. Warmth, protection, making decisions together. It was built entirely around fire. That alone established a whole new equilibrium.
A focal point, yes.
Right.
The truly revolutionary shift, the one that echoes even now, was the Neolithic Revolution. The technology of planting seeds, of creating the first sustainable surplus that fundamentally birthed property, borders, slavery, inequality. It wasn't, I don't think, an ideological choice to suddenly pursue inequality. It felt more like a physical, almost unavoidable consequence of having to manage that surplus. That agricultural technology irreversibly broke the old structural balance of those earlier, more egalitarian bands. That's a compelling point about consequence, but I'd argue the structural choice precedes the resulting inequality. The source material, it notes that these egalitarian bands, they maintain their balance for, 99% of human existence? Stability, cooperation, that was the default setting for a very long time. The shift happened when the choice was made, consciously or not, to abandon that equilibrium to pursue abundance, to pursue surplus. That decision planted the seeds of inequality. And then you see the Pyramid Age, with cities rising explicitly as the material calls them, experiments in centralization. Kings, empires, Romans, Mayans, the Ming Dynasty, they chose a repeated pattern. Expansion, extraction, collapse. It seems their power structures, their choices, not the underlying tech like bronze or clay, determined that systemic and often fatal outcome. Technology just ended up serving a pre-existing intent to centralize power.
So if the Neolithic era sort of defined this new problem of managing surplus, the next massive test came, I suppose, during the Industrial Age. And here, I'd argue, a single invention, the steam engine, did more to restructure global civilization than perhaps any single empire had ever achieved. It connected everything, didn't it? Trains, telegraphs, textile looms. This physical technology, it rapidly spun previously isolated societies into what the material calls one global web. I don't think any structural or ideological choice at that time could have created that sheer scale of integration and connection without the technology providing the infrastructure first. The technology created the global framework that subsequent political and economic structures then, well, they had to organize around it.
Hang on a moment, though. I just don't quite buy that the steam engine necessitated things like child labor or colonial plunder. I mean, I agree the technology dictated the speed of the looms, the reach of the trains, absolutely. But let's go back to that idea of structural choice. The material emphasizes that in those original egalitarian bands, status meant responsibility, not privilege.
It was the decision, somewhere along the line, to redefine status as privilege that was the fundamental structural choice that eventually led to codified laws like Hammurabi's Code, where justice was, weighed in the hand of gods and kings. The technology of agriculture, yes, it provided the tool to create surplus, but the choice to abandon reciprocity for hierarchy, that provided the blueprint for the pyramid. And I think that essential tension persisted right into the industrial age.
But surely that old balance, that egalitarian structure, it was effectively broken the moment continuous surplus became a reality. I'd say, inevitability of managing, storing, defending that surplus, it necessitated property, it necessitated borders, it made a return to mobile egalitarianism impossible on a large scale. The technology of agriculture created the necessary condition for these new, larger, more complex structures to emerge. And if we look later at the Enlightenment, was that incredible intellectual revolution primarily driven by the mind's rebellion, the ideological declaration of rights, or was it significantly pushed forward by the printing press and the telescope?
Well, clearly was fueled by both, but
But the printing press, it multiplied thought faster than armies could burn it, as the material puts it. It massively accelerated the reach of reason. It dethroned certainty by making ideas cheap, widespread. The technology didn't just carry the message, it fundamentally accelerated the whole structure of how thought disseminated. It enabled the Enlightenment to scale globally in a way medieval philosophy, for instance, never could.
okay, yes, the scale changed. Yet look at the duality of the results. Reason gave us science and democracy, true. But the subsequent structural choices also gave us factories, cannons, and this enormous carbon footprint we're dealing with now. The application of reason carried the shadow of extraction. The material notes, quite powerfully, I think, that we learned to fly, but we forgot how to share the sky. For me, that's damning evidence of a structural failure, a failure of choice. The old pattern of expansion-extraction just persisted, even when humanity was armed with, higher reason. The failure to share suggests a failure of political will, of ethical choice, a failure of restraint, perhaps, not simply a lack of technological capacity. The technology just made the cost of that poor choice potentially catastrophic.
Which brings us right up to today, the digital threshold. And frankly, what's happening now is astonishing. I believe this time is fundamentally different, precisely because the technology itself seems to offer the potential for conscious system design on a scale never before imagined. We have access, theoretically, to all the lessons of those who came before, and we have the computational ability through data, AI, biotech, what the material calls the tools of gods, to potentially design our systems consciously. This unique confluence of knowledge, the structural lessons from history, and unprecedented computational power are technological capacity. I think this does offer a chance to finally break that historical pattern of boom and bust, of collapse. The potential for the circle structure, for cooperation, is now potentially global and instantaneous.
I remain skeptical that this moment is entirely unique in its fundamental nature. The source material itself explicitly poses the question that echoes right back to that first campfire. Can we build together without destroying ourselves? That core tension, it feels like it remains. Even with instant global sharing, the material warns that our systems still risk making plenty into poison without restraint. That phrase keeps coming back. The core choice between competition and cooperation, between short-term glory and long-term survival, still seems to be the determinant factor. Technology just drastically increases the stakes. If we choose the pyramid structure again, intense centralization, extraction, then this powerful new technology will simply amplify that choice until the inevitable point of collapse. Only maybe much, much faster this time.
So, we've traced this deep tension, haven't we, from the first fire through the invention of property and surplus, the industrial age, right into the information age. It seems the deeper we look, the more entangled the machine and the choice become. Still, I maintain that every major systemic leap, the fire, the Neolithic surplus, the steam engine, and now data, provided this kind of irresistible force. It continually demands a new structural solution, defining the very boundaries and the scale of human possibility. Technology, in my view, lays the foundation and dictates the shape of the possible system we can build.
And I would conclude by emphasizing again that history seems to demonstrate a continuous, almost repetitive structural pattern: expansion, extraction, collapse. And this happens across multiple technological ages. Technology simply changes the medium, from clay to carbon to data. But the underlying choice between centralizing power, the pyramid, and embracing more egalitarian cooperation, the circle, that feels like the constant. So if technology determines the sheer scale of the system, I believe structural choice ultimately determines that system's longevity and its quality. The unlearned lesson still feels like a structural one about restraint and power.
Well, what we certainly seem to agree on is that these two forces are incredibly, deeply intertwined. The tools we have, data, AI, they determine the capacity and the scale of what we can build. But the structure, the conscious design, our choices, that determines whether that capacity is used for shared benefit or ultimately for extraction.
Exactly. And the true challenge, which the material leaves wide open really, is whether humanity will finally make the conscious choice for the long-term survival of what it calls a federation of reason, ethics, and empathy, rather than opting again for short-term glory. The technology perhaps gives us an unprecedented opportunity, but the choice itself feels fundamentally structural.